All right. Good morning, guys. Thanks for coming. Today I'm going to cover AWS automation using AWS Code Pipeline. So essentially, it's a CI/CD pipeline. Takeaways from this presentation is for someone who wanted to see how AWS Code Pipeline works. So I'll be creating one from the scratch to show how easy it is to set it up. But more significantly, I wanted to show if you wanted to deploy your code into cross-regions, different regions, how you can do that. So a use case for this could be a disaster recovery situation where you have your code you're deploying to one region and disaster recovery you're deploying into another region. For me, the use case was I was working on a Lambda function last year, which was responsible for server states. And our servers are not in one region; they're spread across different regions. So the problem was, anytime I update the code, I had to manually go and deploy the Lambda function, and that's not great. So I looked around. There was no back until last year. There was no out-of-the-box option in AWS Code Pipeline that can let you deploy your code into multiple regions. So I looked into what other people are doing, and so there's a customized approach. I end up adapting that. And but if I'm not wrong, November last year, AWS has given this option in AWS Code Pipeline, where you can add basically multiple steps to deploy your code into multiple regions, and that's sweet and easy and great. However, the customized approach that I ended up using, that still holds its value because, and I'll show you in a minute how to compare both. But if you wanted to have your deployments into different regions and behave differently, then you can perhaps use this customized approach. So, yep, I'm gonna start. Okay. Okay, it's coming here. All right. So in Code Pipeline, so like any CI/CD pipeline, you need a trigger point. So in AWS, you have trigger point where you can have S3 bucket, GitHub source control. Its own source control is code commit. So I have a Lambda function, which is .NET core function. When I push the code in, code commit steps gets executed. And how Code Pipeline works is that works with the artifacts, and it needs to push artifacts somewhere. So it uses S3. Now, when you're creating your Code Pipeline, there's a couple of options, and I'll be showing you. You can use a default default S3 bucket. Yeah, sure.
What is Code Pipeline?
So it's a CI/CD pipeline basically. So you can have different triggers like S3 code commit, and then you can build and you can then deploy. You can have some manual steps. Yep. So with S3 buckets, as I was mentioning, there's a couple of options. So by default, if you set, if I'm not wrong, if you set one S3 bucket for a region, then it stays the same for any other code pipelines. However, when you're creating one, you can actually choose your own S3 bucket. So once, as an example, I check in code, this step kicks in, it moves its artifacts into, say, this folder, my app. Then the next step gets into play. It's a code build is another service in AWS, which you don't need to use Code Pipeline to use it, but code build is something that you can say, this is my source, build it. So you create a project there, and basically in a pipeline, it takes the code from your this my app folder, it builds it and deploys the artifacts into this another folder, my build app. So now the two steps are done. Then comes deployment. In deployment, it's code formation, which normally we use. In code formation template, it basically takes the code from here, and there's a code formation template, which I'll go over in a bit. it will take that and deploy into different regions. So in a built-in approach, with AWS is providing now, so you can add 3 separate steps, or like however many regions you have. You can add those steps, and you can say use the CloudFormation template and deploy into this region or the other or the third one. So this is the built-in approach. Now moving on to the customized approach. Is pretty much similar from all the way up to the code deploy and even CloudFormation. So it'll deploy into your region, and you want to make sure, okay, first this whole thing is getting executed, then you deploy your code into different regions. So what this does is you have a Lambda function after this code formation step. This Lambda function, what it'll do is take the artifacts, the build artifacts from this folder, and it'll just simply copy into separate S3 buckets. So as I mentioned before, in a code pipeline, you can have a code commit as a trigger, or as I was telling you that you can have a S3 bucket. So essentially, say if you have 3 separate regions that you want to deploy to, you create 3 separate pipelines in those regions and trigger it from the S3 bucket. So once you copy this code, so region 1, region 2, region 3, these pipelines get triggered. So why do you want to take this approach versus the other approach? This one is if you have a straightforward code, no changes into when you're deploying into different regions, yeah, you can go with built-in approach. However, if you have different behaviors that you want to do for each deployment, this could be used as a solution. So a use case is, say, first region, you deploy the code from S3 bucket. You wanted to maybe trigger a Lambda function, send email, or do some entries in DynamoDB or some logs or something, and then deploys it. The second approach could be when it deploys, come here, it pause your execution for 7 days, and it sends out email. So there's a step for manual approval within the code pipeline. It sends out email or SMS to the stakeholders. So stakeholders can wait. A use case could be this, if this is your staging environment deployment, they can see if all the regression testing has been passed, then yeah, go ahead and approve it, and then it will deploy into that region, that production. The third could be that you're not deploying anywhere, you're just simply handing over the code to another customer. So this is you copy into customer S3 bucket or another S3 bucket which customer has access to, and send SMS notification to them that code is ready to be downloaded. A use case is in Cloud Control, we have, when we deploy any production release into different data centers, we have our Canberra user who basically we deploy them for a separate downloadable content. Yes. Huh?
What's the bucket?
Okay, so S3 Simple Storage Service, it's a storage service in AWS. Use that you can basically create different buckets, and so those, okay, normally in AWS when you create a resource, that remains within, the services remain within the region, but those buckets, though they have the region associated, but they have a global scope. So it's a storage, basically you put your files into it. Yeah, so it's a storage level, object level storage. Deploying anything in files, basically. So most of AWS products and their lifecycle works around S3 for any kind of storage. So yeah, that's a separate topic to cover the whole S3, like how it works. But essentially,
not just file.
Huh?
Not just file.
Any storage, yes, yeah. Yes, exactly. So everything goes there, and then you have S3 Glacier that is for your long-term archival storage there. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if there's no more questions, I can go ahead and start with the creation of a template.
So the code will be completely either code taken from any of the processes, it can create or use bucket itself as a.
So what will happen is in here. So this is our say .NET application. You check in your code,
Yeah.
check in into your source repository. That could be GitHub. Okay. In AWS, their alternative is code commit. They call it code commit.
Code commit is equivalent of.
It's a source control. So once you check in the code there, yeah, you can just have it as a source control. But once you're creating a CI/CD pipeline, the next step is you need to build. So there's another service given by AWS called code build, where you say, okay, this is my build file. Use that to build it, and I'll show you in a minute. So it builds it, and after building, so if you see here in this picture, code commit copies this raw source code into this my app folder. Once code build comes into it, it takes that those files, source files, builds it, and then takes the artifacts, build artifacts, packages you can say, and put it in this folder, build app folder. It's a separate folder. Now it's ready to be just deployed basically, and then yeah, you can deploy it however you want.
Why? If the code is initially set up, it's cannot copy in S3. Just duplicate it. Actually.
Yeah, this is how it works basically. It copies here, and every time that when you're copying a code, those are also artifacts, but those are artifacts are versions you can say. So you do check in the code. You say, okay, this needs to be built and deployed. So it comes here as a one version. So under this folder, you get many versions basically. Yeah, you can clean it up if you like. It's based. But the whole S3 thing is, so the code comes here, then their pipeline can take that code, build it, and then create separate version of that. So these are the source artifacts and these are the build artifacts. Yeah. But I don't know why they do it this way. Yeah. Okay.
So now you have to maintain the code here as well.
No, you don't have to maintain it. This is just a temporary thing. This is just a temporary placeholder where things get packaged and then get deployed, and you can delete it. It doesn't delete anything else. It's just a temporary storage there.
It's equivalent to a build machine doing a get clone or a get pull down that repo. Then you build it,
yeah,
and then test and do what other steps you want on the compiled code. That's happening in S3, and that's that code build step. And then when you're done, the artifacts and the outputs are put also back into S3 and be consumed by the cloud formation scripts or whatever you have.
Yep. So the life cycle you can think. The life cycle is for the execution of this build. You don't need those artifacts after that. You can delete it pretty much.
So the code is executed from S3 bucket or something?
Yes, yeah. S3 bucket.
So how you make sure that
I haven't.
because all the services done after you call, you should do some logic things on your S3 bucket.
I haven't tried GitHub integration, by the way. I've just done with the code commit. So in code commit, it's under all under your account. No one else. Only when you have a rights to push or check in your code, only then this comes into. This is not publicly accessible.
Known for its deployment of S3 bucket. It's known from very insecure deployments, and last year we had a number of breaches caused by S3 bucket exposed to the internet. I'm just curious.
No, so this is not publicly accessible. The S3 bucket has got a role. That role has an access to those S3 buckets, and this is not publicly accessible. Only you can access your code.
Some security regulations how to deploy S3 bucket not exposed to the internet.
That's by default. When you create, you are not creating your bucket yourself. The code pipeline creates a bucket, so it's secure, and then you have a role to manage that. Unless and until you are using that role, you can't even access that S3 bucket. So.
Also on top of the role, it is a bucket policy.
Yeah.
So if you are worried about the internet exports, you need to tighten up your bucket policy. So if you have, say, for example, 4 or 5 different AWS accounts, and the user under those accounts, they only want to use the particular bucket, right? So you set up non-core bucket policies only for the user under those particular accounts. Can you go to this?
In S3, it's least privilege model generally. So unless and until you manually open it for public, any bucket that you create, yep.
But this way bucket is notorious for it's a good situation.
Exactly. So that's why I think it's recommended when you're creating it. There's an option you want to do your recommended S3 bucket or your custom one. So choose recommended because then the S3 code pipeline has created that and have been placed all the security measures there.
One more question. I'm not aware of this topic.
Yep.
So if the bucket completely created, would there be any update of the bucket policy automatically created or the bucket policy will be anything?
The bucket policy, I think it's not publicly accessible.
But the bucket is by default public.
So the objects within that, you have to
Right from the bucket and all it's publicly accessible. The moment you create a bucket, it's open. So yeah, by default. So my question is, when the code pipeline automatically creates a bucket, will it attach policy?
we can check it, but I think it attaches the policy where it does not make it publicly accessible. Yep. Right. Okay. So I promised I was going to create a code pipeline, so I'll quickly do that. So for code pipeline to start working, it needs to have a code build project. So I'm going to go ahead and create a build project in code commit. So I'll show you. Right. So this is my code, which is just a Lambda function, doesn't do anything much. There's this build spec file, which basically a code build project service needs to know how to build your project. So it's pretty simple. It basically does the .NET restore in a pipeline, and it just publish it and put it in these folders. And so we will be creating this. So when we are creating a code pipeline, build project, it asks you, okay, the source is code commit, repository, and under the environment, you need to tell which image to use. So using the managed image, Ubuntu is .NET Core, using this image, Core 2.1. And I already have an existing role, so otherwise you could create a new role. And so this is the build spec file that it wants. If it names different, then you got to put it in there. Otherwise, just use the same build spec. Artifacts. So I don't need artifacts for this example, but if you wanted to run this code build project and wanted to deploy artifacts into an S3 bucket separately, then you can basically configure this section. But we just want this to build the code for us. So if I create build project, and while it's created it, I'll start the build just to make sure that it's building fine. Okay, while it's building, I'll go ahead and start creating a pipeline. So under the Ohio region, I'm creating a pipeline. Name it as region. I have an existing role, so I don't need to create another one. In East. Okay, so this is the option where you choose your default location or custom location. So default location stays same for the region for all the code pipelines. Again, you need to mention how is this pipeline getting triggered. The first step, as I was showing here. So we are saying, okay, code commit, use this repository branch, and how does it look for the triggers? So this is a recommended way. Obviously, it's an event-based through CloudWatch, but you can use this one that keep on polling for the changes. So this is obviously the easy way to do. In build, you can gives you option for Jenkins, but code build project which we just created and it's in progress. It should be built by now, but anyway, it should be there for us to use it. Okay, and the next step is deploy. So this is where we mentioned the cloud formation template basically. So in cloud formation template, you can say create or update stack. So first time you need to create it, so it'll create it for you. Multi-region. So I'll show you just in a second. So when we're creating a code pipeline, it comes into these artifacts, build artifacts. That's you can change the name, but that's the by default name. So under the build artifacts, there's a cloud formation template which I want to show, but there's this thing. Okay. How can I move? Yeah. Okay. Right. Code commit. So if I go to my repository. Okay, so this is the cloud formation template. It's pretty simple. It's just saying, okay, the name, description, the type is a function, the handler name. This is important because that will tell it where's the location. So it'll give these references to the bucket name and the object key, and then it'll say, okay, this is the source and execute it. It needed a role, so I already had this role before. Now once I go back, I basically add that here. And let me quickly see the build that we did before. Yeah, so it's building fine. So back to creating code pipeline. So you go to advanced and so basically build artifact variable has this build bucket name and object key, which we are assigning to these variables, which our cloud formation template is looking for here. Build bucket name, build object key, and that fills in here, and then it executes the cloud formation template. Okay, so I already have a role for that. You need a role for the cloud formation to execute that. So let me quickly create this pipeline. And so, yeah, so this, what it does, when you create it, it actually triggers one. And one of the worst things is you can't stop it. Or at least I don't know how to stop it. So one problem is sometimes if there's a problem going on, it can execute a step for like 15 minutes and then times out, and then you know what's happening. So one idea is when it's happening, you can actually check the logs, how it's progressing through. So you can click that and you can actually see these logs going through. So let me go ahead and go to this Ohio. Let's see if we already have Lambda function deployed yet. It just deployed 5 seconds ago, so that's great. What I'll do to show that it's working, I'll go ahead and update the code to see that it's triggering the pipeline and we are seeing the output. So I'll go there and function. So it's just taking an input and giving an output in capital letters. So I'll just say demo working. And yeah, it's an email, but you can just put in the name and then it'll take it.
No validation?
No validation. So I just pushed it in. So let's see what happens to the code pipeline. Well, it's still executing. Oh, it executed the last one. So it should be, it was a minute ago. So it should be triggering this one very shortly. Let me refresh it. Yeah, it just triggered now. So that step is completed. This step is coming here. This build is working, and it should be quick now. While this is happening, I can just show you quickly that S3 bucket. Okay, in S3 bucket we have this in Ohio. This is the one it's using, multi-region. So build artifacts and sort artifacts, and see it creates, back to your question, so it creates here your version of your artifacts. You can delete it, you don't need it after some time. Going back to this one, this is just being deployed, the last step. And then I can show the Lambda function working. Let me refresh it. It may have already been deployed now. Let me see. Yeah, 44 seconds ago, so it should be already deployed now. I go there. Can't do it. And I'm just going to test it. Okay, so if I test this, it should append our hello with the dash demo working. So it shows that the check-in worked and the whole pipeline executed. And while I am here, I already, for the second scenario, I'm not going to build that pipeline. I already have it built. I'll just quickly show you, in case you're curious. If I go to this pipeline and change this to Sydney, and let me do one thing. I'll go to functions. I'll go to Sydney as well. So I'm just going, while I'm just going to trigger one while I'm going to show you that pipeline. So I don't know if that's the one. Yeah. Oh no, I'm doing something wrong. Okay, I need to be in code commit. Sorry, my bad. So I go to Sydney region in code commit. Repositories. Same kind of function. I'm just going to trigger that. So multi-region deployment running. Okay. Okay. Then it gets pushed. Okay, so I am into Sydney region. So this is the separate pipeline where we have the customized approach. Similar steps. This build, deploy. After deploy, so this is a built-in option where you can just say, hey, deploy this into Canada region. And that's where we just have this icon, cross-region action. So we can see it's being kicked in and it's getting deployed. Okay. So the Lambda function, that's a customized approach. Create a Lambda function means this gets executed. This Lambda function basically takes the code and put it into a Virginia bucket where a pipeline is configured in Virginia region. So if I go ahead and duplicate this and change this region to Virginia. Go to pipelines. So there's this. Here we can see this is a pipeline configured to be triggered from an S3 and then just gets deployed, use the same CloudFormation to deploy it there. So this is the, this is the whole thing. But once this gets copied over, this will go ahead and deploy that. So I think you get the idea. I don't have to waste time here on that. So any questions on that? Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.